the mistake. Aurora's POV. I never imagined it would end this way. Not even in my wildest dream. My head was pounding, my eyes rolling in my head, my hands shaking as I stood in his office doorway and tried to catch my breath. But my breath was taken away from me by the sight in front of me, which was like a punch to the stomach. There he was, my mate, the love of my life, sitting behind his desk with his shirt unbuttoned, and a woman, not just any woman, but my step Alicia. They were kissing and smooching, having sex before me. Their guttural sound filled the air. My heart pounded against my chest as I froze. As I watched them, the weight of the room's silence felt oppressive, and their intimacy seemed so natural. Bennett had never kissed me that way before, and to think I had come here so we can prepare my birthday party and met this. Then Bennett's eyes locked with mine. There was no surprise in his eyes. He was slow to apologize or offer an explanation. Rather, a half-smile that was all too familiar formed on his lips. And my heart broke again into thousands of irreplaceable pieces. With a casual tone, as if nothing was wrong, he buttoned his shirt and said, "Aurora, why? You didn't tell me you were coming over." "Really?" Trying to find my voice, I swallowed hard, my throat drying out. Alicia made no effort to feel guilt. Instead, she sat on the table staring at me like I was a pestering ghost. I thought we were. But he works stayed in my throat. Bile rose in my throat as Alicia, who was beside him, moved her fingers grazing his arm. Ethan's tone was colder than I had ever heard him. At first I thought he wanted to apologize, but his words broke me, and I felt like vanishing forever. "You were never my mate," he said. "I never loved you, Aurora." I wasn't expecting this. For a moment everything seemed to spin, and the world tilted. "What are you talking about?" I asked, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. "As you can see, I'm with someone else." Bennett glanced at Alicia next to him. "Alicia is here," he said, staring at her with love. "She's the one my heart beat for, my mate." I was slammed by the word. "You see," Bennett said, rising to his feet, "you were just a distraction." I stumbled, my legs suddenly weak. I don't understand." I pressed a hand to the doorframe in an attempt to keep myself together. "You're joking, right? We have been together for 3 years. We were—" Ethan cut me off with a wave of his hands, his eyes darting over me like I was trash. "Aurora, I'm sorry, but I made up my mind a long time ago. You were a total waste of time. Come to think of it, I'm the alpha. Having a pitiful omega beside me would be a shame." It struck me like a blast of cold air. Me? Pitiful? Waste of time? I couldn't understand what was going on. My eyes darted over to Alicia, who still hadn't wore her clothes properly, her breasts half exposed, and she was grinning, enjoying my pain. "You should move on," he said, and looked away. "Alpha Bennett Hayden rejects you. Aurora Maggie Stewart. It's done. Now get out." I was cut by the finality of his words. I nearly passed out when my knees gave out, but I tried to stand despite my heart thumping fiercely in my chest. "No, Bennett, you can't do this. It's me you love. You can't reject me," I said, my voice cracking. "Yes," Bennett interrupted, his tone now firm. "I can and I will. Aurora, you have been a complete burden." He turned away from his desk and approached me with a detached expression that made my stomach turn. "I'm done with you. Don't bother yourself and get out. Bennett, please, I beg you." I cried again, trying to touch his hands, but he moved away. I was shattered by the betrayal which hung heavy in the air. I was in love with this man, the person to whom I had dedicated my heart, the one that I had unquestionably trusted. He was now rejecting me as if I didn't exist, not just as a mate, but he had called me pitiful. I wanted to say something, but nothing came out. It hurt so badly that I was unable to breathe. All I could do was look at the man who had just destroyed all of my hope of being loved. "Bennett," the word came out in a broken gasp. He didn't care, though. Again, his gaze swept over me before returning to Alicia with a smile that made my stomach turn. I watched as they both shared a hot, passionate kiss, and my heart broke again. Without waiting, I turned and ran out. My legs were moving on their own will, and my mind was a blur of shock. I was having trouble keeping my thoughts together, and it felt like the world was spinning. By the time I got to the elevator, my knees finally failed me, and I fell to the ground with my back to the chilly metal wall. My eyes were watering, but I fought the urge to cry. I didn't want to show him how painful this was. My mind was racing as the elevator went down, going over everything he had said, looked at, and gestured. How did my life turn out this way? I had always thought that we were destined to be together. I saw him to be my soulmate. But he'd said I was to be merely a distraction. How I got home was a mystery to me. When I first entered the apartment, it felt tight and suffocating. Everything that I had known felt strange now. There was a lot of emptiness in my heart. I collapsed onto the couch and gazed at the vacant area from me. Going to sleep and doing my chores were things I couldn't bring myself to do. Bennett was all that was on my mind. Alicia as well. His words kept ringing in my ears, and I found myself believing him. Pitiful Omega, the stranger I met, Aurora's Pav. The sting of Bennett's words was still fresh in my mind as I sat there in the silence of my room. Just as I was about to be crushed by the silence and heartbreak, my phone buzzed. The emptiness I had felt had engulfed me completely that I was confused on what to do. I stared at my phone. It was my best friend, Mia. "Get dressed, girl. We are heading out. Whether you like it or not, I'm taking you to the bar tonight." She giggled into the phone. I looked at the clock and hesitated. My stepmother would be upset if I left the chores. But I felt needed to take a break and put the whole rejection stuff behind me. I was too weak to give a damn about her anymore, but I wasn't brave to do that. I ran a hand through my hair and muttered, "You know she'll be mad if I don't help to make dinner." "Fuck her," Mia angrily said. "You have been enduring their nonsense. A lot, girl. You need a break and a drink. I promise you'll feel better. Head straight to the bar." After another second of hesitation, I nodded. "All right. I'll be there in an hour." When I finally reached the bar, the lights and noise were too much to handle. The air was filled with the buzz of conversation and the clink of glasses, but I couldn't hear it. The pain of rejection was still fresh. I pushed my way through the crowd in search of Mia, who was sitting at a table close to the back. Her face lit up when she saw me. She pulled me into a tight hug. "There you are," she squeaked. "I'll mage a guess. You were dumped for his new bitch, right? The news is all over the pack, probably leaked by the company's janitor." I took a seat across from her and nodded. "Worse," I muttered, inhaling deeply. "Mia, I walked in on them. My stepsister and he was behind at his desk. There they were right in front of me having sex like I don't exist." Mia reached for my hand as her face changed to one of anger. "I'm sorry, girl, but whoa, that piece of shit is crazy. He has been telling you lies for months?" She sighed. "But you were deeply in love to see it." I shook my head. I blinked back tears. "Mia, I thought that we were mates, destined by the moon goddess. I thought that he was the one, but I was merely a distraction for him. Now he's with her. I'm not sure how to get over this. How am I supposed to move on? To make it better?" Mia's voice grew softer as she squeezed my hand. "Aurora, you don't make it better. You leave it behind. He's not worth your tears. You're beautiful and strong." But the words sounded meaningless. Strong? Did she know he had called me a pitiful Omega? I took the drink Mia slid toward me and muttered, "I hate him." With the alcohol burning a trail down my throat, I drank it in one gulp. Mia didn't stop me. Rather, she requested another round. After a few hours, the bar was a haze of faces and lights. I could feel the alcohol doing things to my head and body that I didn't expect. It was my first time having alcohol, and I felt no guilt. The alcohol fulled the ache in my chest, but not completely. Leaning back in my chair, I took another shot and nodded to the music playing. Everyone around me was laughing and dancing, and the atmosphere seemed to be pulsing with energy. In this chaos, the darkness inside of me felt a little less tight, even though I didn't belong here. It was better staying home alone and crying. In an attempt to drown out the noise, I watched Mia and a guy from the corner of my eye while they were deep in conversation. He was not an everyday guy. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He was too handsome. He threw a cold, almost predatory glance around the room. The air between us changed as his gaze came toward me and our eyes met. There was a buzz of electricity between us. I got up and walked toward him without feeling my body moving unnaturally under the influence of the drink I had. The memories of Bennett, the betrayal, and the agony that tore at me were all things I needed to get away from. Still staring at him, I walked to the bar and leaned against it. "Buy me a drink," I said in a low, almost demanding voice. He cocked his eyebrows and his lips curled in a sexy smirk. "You're a bit too young, my love, to be in here." The alcohol made me bold, so I smiled. "You shouldn't be talking down to me because I'm a little too old to. Show some respect." He nodded at the bartender. "Nice 2 shots of whiskey." He shoved one of the drinks at me when they came. I gulped it up again. His hand came out and grabbed mine before I could put the glass down. His fingers stung me with something raw and needy. He pulled me closer, leaning in so his lips were near my ear. He pressed his hot breath against my skin and whispered, "You want to forget everything tonight?" I nodded sheepishly. Without a word, he stood up and steered me through a hallway and into a small room that smelled of old wood and light cologne, then tightened his hold on my hand. Tension between us was much and thick, and the heat between us was instant. My heart was pounding and my head was racing with desire and alcohol. His lips slammed into mine before I could react. His hands moved down my body, drawing me in closer as I opened up to his demanding, hungry kiss. Something deep within me that I hadn't felt in a very long time was ignited by his touch, which was like fire. My head spun as his hands roamed and tugged at my clothes while I groaned against his lips. His hands were now on my hips, effortlessly lifting me as he pressed my back against the chilly wall, breaking the kiss. With a rough voice, he asked, "Do you want this?" Desperate to let go and forget, I nodded. Suddenly, everything became hazy. Everything faded, including the weight of my broken heart and the sting of Bennett's betrayal. I lost myself in the moment's unadulterated pleasure and the heat of this stranger's touch. There was no love, not even tenderness, as we made out. This was the kind of sex you had when you want to forget and too broken to care about anything else in the world. And that included the rejection I had. Wave of shame. Aurora's pav. When I opened my eyes the next morning, the sunlight coming through the curtains hit my face. I tried to clear my head of the fog as I blinked confusedly. I was in pain as I tried to sit up. Something between my thighs throbbed with a pulsing discomfort, and my legs felt heavy. It took me a moment to realize why. The memories then rushed back. His hand, his mouth, the way his body pressed against mine, lifting me and drawing me in, that a sense of unadulterated, desperate need. Then I realized that I had lost my virginity to a stranger. A wave of shame swept through me, seeping into every part of me as I drew the sheets over my body. What had I done? This is not how I wanted to lose my virginity, not to some stranger who I barely remember now. I felt shame crept up my body like cold water. Then I caught sight of something. I looked at the mess of sheets next to me, and I realized that I was all alone. He wasn't here, and his side of the bed was cold. I felt a surge of relief, but it was soon followed by a wave of shame. I didn't know who he was, where I was, or what I had done. With my heart pounding, I pulled the sheets closer around me. He was nowhere in the room, and I had no idea where he was. His shirt was next to me on the floor. I put it on mindlessly, and as the fabric hung loosely around my body, the hem just barely touched my thighs, I thought of what next to do. I got up shakily, still trying to make sense of what had happened that night. I remembered little butt, and the dull ache between my legs served as a continual reminder that I had given myself wholeheartedly to a stranger. I had to leave this place. If he sees me, I'm doomed. The whole pack will hate me, definitely. It was late morning, almost noon, when I looked out of the wind. I swiftly grabbed my phone off the nightstand and looked at the time. I couldn't to stay here any longer. I didn't want to confront him or let him see how ashamed I was. My heart stopped when I heard the bathroom door open. I froze and my breath caught in my throat. I didn't want him to see me, not like this. I spun on my feet as I hurried to the door and fumbled for my shoes. Him seeing me in this state, embarrassed, remorseful, and overcome with a persistent sense of loss, was the last thing I wanted. What if he was someone I know? My heart was racing, and without daring to look back, I flung open the door and ran down the hallway. I could hear his voice calling out faintly behind me as I ran away. My face was flushed as I hurried down the stairs and out the front door. The burst of fresh air hit me. Outside was as busy as hell, but I cared less. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to leave here. Immediately. The sky was glowing orange as the sun started to set by the time I arrived home. The cold air felt sharp against my skin, and I shivered, pulling the oversized shirt tighter around me. I locked the door behind me as I got to the apartment and flopped down on the couch, burying my face in my hands. The sound I wanted to make, a scream, got stuck in my throat. I couldn't understand what had happened or how it happened. I didn't know who to blame, so I blamed the alcohol. My phone buzzed. I snapped out of my throw. Mia had left a message. "I wanted to know if you were all right. Give me a call when you can." I gazed at the message for a while as a knot formed in my throat. I should have given her a call. She had supported me through all of the drama with Bennett, but this was something else. I had to tell someone what had happened, even though I didn't want to. With trembling fingers, I swiftly typed a message. "It was chaotic last night. I have no idea what took place. I simply want to forget." Before I could stop myself, I hit send and threw the phone on the coffee table. The stranger's touch, the heat between us, and the sudden collision were all replayed in my mind as I gazed at the ceiling. Although it was passionate and something which shouldn't have happened, but it felt good. It felt like a last-ditch effort to patch up a hole in my heart, to do anything at all, anything but confront the pain Bennett had caused. And now I was. Empty, alone, and only holding on to the shards of a one-night stand that I didn't know if I should regret or not. I felt kinky. I had to wash. Everything had to be washed away, including his touch, his smell, and the heat that was still burning in my body. With my legs still unsteady, I got up and stumbled to the restroom. I removed the shirt and got into the shower. The hot water burned my skin, but the embarrassment stayed. It wasn't just physical shame. It was something else. I was the girl who had threw her shame to the wind and enjoyed a rough night with a stranger. As I tried to get my thoughts straight, I let the water run over me, but I couldn't help but think about him again. His gaze, his hot roaming hands. Would he care about me or even remember me? Well, I didn't care, and I didn't want to think about him again. "Aurora!" I heard someone yelled from downstairs, and I cursed under my breath. Darn it. They are back. My life had returned, back to endless torture, and been a maid to my stepsister and stepmother. The news. Aurora's POV. 1 month had passed since that evening. It has been a month since a stranger stole my innocence. I had been caught up in the whirlwind of Bennett's betrayal and rejection a month ago. I really made an effort to move on, but it wasn't simple, though. Cassandra, my stepmother, had been making my life miserable. Cooking, cleaning, and other household duties made me feel like a maid in my own house. My stepsister Alicia wasn't any better either. She was the prim little princess who was the queen of the house and never had to do a thing. She was everything I wasn't, and I detested her for it. What I detested most about her, though, was how incredibly perfect she was around my father. As I scrubbed the floor, I heard her voice on the phone, her high-pitched giggle like nails on a chalkboard. She was preparing for tonight's ball, which my father had assured her she could go to with Bennett as her date. I felt sick to my stomach at the thought of him. I should have spent time with him like we used to, but he was with her instead after rejecting me. The betrayal still stings like an open wound which I couldn't forget. I rubbed my forehead trying to concentrate on the work at hand, but the pain returned. I swayed slightly. The room tilted and my head spun. My hand clutched the back of the sofa for support as I staggered. "You can't clean the floor perfectly. You're pathetic." I turned around. I saw her standing with her arms folded across her chest in the living room doorway. She was already ready for the ball, wearing a gorgeous red dress. She stared at me with a gleam in her eyes, obviously taking pleasure in my pain. As I staggered once more, my knees weak from the dizziness I felt. She arched an eyebrow. How embarrassing, just cleaning the floor and you're about to faint. She mocked, stepping over the mess I had cleaned. Did you really think you'd ever be anything other than a maid in this house? I didn't reply. I was unable to. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat, and I was too exhausted to say anything. I wasn't even sure that I had the strength to do it. She went on with a tone full of contempt. Poor maid. I tried not to think about the hot tears that threatened to spill out of my eyes. Then my stepmother entered the room. What's wrong with you? You're a waste of space who can't even do something as simple as properly cleaning the house. Her voice was icy, piercing the atmosphere like a knife. I tried to say something when the force of her slap caused my head to jerk sideways. I wasn't surprised. This was my life. Constant degrading remarks and insults. Stupid Omega, she said. I bit my lip in an attempt to contain my tears. I had had enough. It was too much. I felt like I was being choked by the weight of everything. My father, who was unaware of the mistreatment, still believed that Alicia was his ideal child. I was nothing more than an annoyance in their idyllic world. I'm off. Make sure you finish all your chores, Alicia said, kicking me as she left with her mother. As they walked out the door, I was left, in the quiet, her laughter echoing in my ears. As I to tidy up the mess they had created, I stood there with shaking hands. My head swam as I felt lightheaded once more. My stomach turned over. I felt waves of nausea sweep over me all at once. I barely made it to the sink before my body rejected everything I had eaten as I stumbled to the bathroom. I coughed and held onto the sink as I tried to fight off the nausea. The nausea didn't go away. Instead, it only got worse until I thought I might faint. As I tried to steady myself, I fell into nothingness. My eyes squinted in pain from the harsh light from the overhead lamp when I woke up. My head was pounding. I was lying on the living room couch after blinking and trying to regain my senses. Alicia and my stepmother were standing above me, looking me as if I was a spectacle. Looks like someone finally woke up, Alicia said, laughing, folding her arms. I was still too confused to really understand what was happening. I groaned as I forced myself to sit down, feeling the weight of my lightheadedness drag me back down. What's going on? I asked. My voice was barely above a whisper. Cassandra crossed her arms and looked at me in disdain. Looks like our little maid has finally gotten herself into trouble, Alicia said, her tone sickeningly sweet as I stared at her. What happened? I asked again, feeling stupid. My dear, you fainted, Cassandra said mockingly. Also, we have a problem now, don't we? I blinking. A problem? Alicia's smirk widened as she raised an eyebrow. Oh, please don't be stupid. You are aware of the situation. Aren't you pregnant? I froze, feeling my heart sink to my stomach. No, What? Shut up, Aurora. For weeks you have been ill. You finally got what you wanted, slut. Alicia's words pierced me like a knife. And who is the bastard that got you pregnant? They stared at me with disgust in their eyes, and I felt so small, so insignificant. I couldn't possibly be pregnant. How could that even be possible? I asked myself as tears streamed down my cheeks. All of a sudden, the nausea, the dizziness, and the lack of total control made sense. I shook my head in shock and muttered inaudibly, "It's not true, I'm not pregnant." But before I could finish, Cassandra's hand came flying in the hair and sliced through my cheeks as pain blinded me momentarily. "Slut," she spat. "Now start taking." Leaving. Aurora's paw. I found it difficult to breathe. My chest felt as if it were being squeezed by an unseen hands. The word pregnant, it made me feel even more horrified. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and my heart was beating wildly that I could literally hear it. How could you? Cassandra looked down at me with disdain. I don't know what you are saying. But before I could finish, Cassandra slapped me hard across the cheeks that sent me reeling back and hitting my back against the wall, and pain raced through me. But they didn't give a damn. Cassandra's mocking and cruel laughter echoed, and Alicia's smirk left a lasting impression on my mind. "You think anyone will give a damn about you now?" Alicia asked in a disgusting voice. "A pregnant Omega, how thoughtful of you. You are so worthless. Just like your mother," Cassandra added. "You have brought disgrace to this family. The weight of their words made the world to spin and swirl around me, and I could take it no more. "Now can you do well to tell us the bastard who got you pregnant?" Cassandra said, grabbing me by the arm, her fingers digging into my skin. I wanted to say something, but only hot air came out. Cassandra pushed me back, and I fell back again, my head hitting the wall. "You know what?" Cassandra said, grabbing me again. "You're leaving this house," she said, pushing me to the door while Alicia snatched my coat off the hook. "Please," I begged. "Don't waste your time, Mother. Why don't we kill her and lie to Father that she ran off?" Alicia suggested, and as I stared at Cassandra, I knew she was about taking the suggestion. Without waiting, I turned and ran away. The chilly night air slapped my skin as I ran, not even bothering to close the door, but I felt nothing. I still couldn't believe that I was pregnant. What had I gotten myself into? And the worst part was that I didn't know who the idiot was. I did not know where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away from them and the nightmare they had let me live. I ran through the dark streets faster and harder, despite the burning feeling in my chest that felt like I was suffocating. As I sprinted through the deserted streets, the tears that I had suppressed since I woke up finally spilled out. Cassandra and her daughter's words kept piercing my heart that I didn't watch where I was going. I didn't see the car before me. The world around me became hazy and blurry as the sound of tires screeching and a sickening crack filled the air. I stumbled over it. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through my body, causing my bones to shake. The world whirled in frantic circles as pain erupted all over my body. I tried to get up, but my legs felt too heavy that I couldn't. I saw someone standing before me, voices over me. Then everything was dark. I couldn't remember how long that I had been unconscious, but my mind was dulled by a fog of confusion that surrounded my it. Where am I? My eyes opened, but I quickly closed them again as a searing pain pierced my skull. My head felt as if it had been punctured by 1,000 needles. The pain held me from sitting up, so I had to lie back, my eyes unfocused and staring on the ceiling above me. What am I doing here? I thought to myself again. As my vision gradually adjusted, the lights from the chandelier above the soft sheets against my skin in the bed below were strange. And I knew this wasn't my room. My limbs felt like stone when I tried to move again. My hands shook as I touched my head and felt the tight bandages. I tried to remember, but they came in shards, the headlights, the burning pain of what had happened. I sighed, though I didn't know where I was, but it felt safer to be here, to be far away from my stepmother and her daughter. The door creaked open slowly, and someone was standing there staring at me. The sight of him made my heart to skip a beat. He was tall, with well-chiseled jawline and piercing gray eyes. He was devastatingly handsome. He strode in my direction, his presence dominating the room. "You're awake," he said in a rough, tired voice. My heart raced as I stared at him. He was too perfect and too handsome for his own good. I tried to speak, but the weight of what I had passed through choked me. My throat was dry and the words stuck. My voice was barely audible as I croaked. "Where am I?" He moved toward the bed. "You're safe here. I knocked you down and brought you to my house." I had no idea how to react. I couldn't read his intentions, so I couldn't tell if I was truly safe, like he said. Should I be thankful or get angry at him? I was too tired to think clearly, and I was unable to speak. "Thank you," I muttered, my words shaky and brittle. He looked at me with unwavering gaze and didn't say right away. I stared at him and was expecting to see emotions in his eyes, pain, guilt, or something, but his eyes were cold. "Why were you running away, or what were you running from?" he finally asked, staring fixedly at me. I swallowed hard and asked instead, "How long?" "You have been here for a week," he said, folding his arms. "You still haven't answered my question." Just when I was about to say something, there was a knock on the door, and after a brief silence it was pushed open and an elderly woman whom I presumed to be a maid by the way she was dressed. "Greetings, Alpha Callum," she said, and bowed slightly. "The Beta of North Howl Pack requests for your presence." My eyes bulged open. "Alpha?" "Fate-bound. Aurora's Pav." The soft click of the door woke me up from my agitated sleep. I didn't even know that I had fallen asleep after he left. A young maid came in with a courteous but hesitant expression. The aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted chicken filled the air as she carried a tray full of food, making my stomach rumble in protest. She put the tray on the bedside table and said in a quiet voice, "Good afternoon, Miss Alpha Callum gave me the order to take care of you. What do you need?" I was unsure whether to accept her generosity or to ask her questions about my current state, so I blinked at her. The chaos of everything that had happened made my body hurt, but I tried not to show it. But my stomach's persistent growl betrayed me, and I answered, "I'm fine." The maid smiled slightly sympathetically. "There is no problem, but you should eat, please." After a moment of hesitation, I nodded. "Right now, I just need water," I muttered in a small voice. She poured a glass and handed it to me, then moved aside. "Thank you," I muttered in a softer voice than I had meant. "The food," she said, waving her hand over the tray. "It's all yours, miss. Just give me a call if you need anything else," she said in a kind and comforting voice. As she left, I noticed a slight pause near the door, her footsteps stuttering just a little. From down the hall came a loud argument, the loud words piercing the dense wood. Alpha Callum was the only one that I heard with someone else, too. Despite not being able to hear the entire conversation, my ears perked up with curiosity. The other voice was harsh and accusatory, but it wasn't the betas. The argument appeared to center on a significant issue or person. Not ready? She can't be my mate. This is too much. The conversation was cut off as the door clicked shut. With my thoughts racing, I sank back into the plush pillows. Why was he arguing? And does it seem to be about me? The silence stretched for hours, interrupted only by the rustle of the wind outside. The knot of uneasiness in my stomach was still stubbornly tight, but I had eaten some of the food that had been left for me. Over the horizon, the sun had turned crimson and golden as it began to sink lower in the sky. Sitting on the bed's edge, I gazed out the window and exhaled. Even though I was in a peaceful environment now, I still couldn't get rid of the sense of being trapped and remembering my stepmother and sister. I snapped out of my thoughts as I heard the door behind me creak open. Alpha Callum was standing in the doorway when I turned around. He had a commanding yet understated presence, and his movements had a quiet confidence that made the room appear smaller. "How are you feeling, Aurora Marcellus?" he said in a deep, smooth voice, each syllable of my name as if he had known me before. I blinked, surprised. "You know my full name?" I questioned, my voice faltering with a mix of shock and anxiety. "How do you know my full name?" There was something deeper in his gaze, an emotion that was nearly impossible to read, but a tiny smile tugged at his lips. With an uncanny calmness in his voice, he answered, "I've always known your name." My heart raced in my chest as I stammered. What? What do you mean, and who are you really?" The room seemed to shrink as Callum stepped forward, his towering presence overshadowing me. "Aurora, let's say you don't know me, but I know you so well." Instinctively, I stepped back and shook my head. "You are the alpha of this pack, that's all I know." His expression softened with something like regret as he sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. "You are my mate, Aurora." The words hung heavy in the air. My mate? I shook my head once more as a wave of disbelief swept over me. "That isn't possible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You felt it," he stated coolly and without wavering, "but you were too stubborn to acknowledge it." Frustrated, I glared at him. "You have no knowledge of who I am. You only helped me because you almost knocked me over." "Oh, but I do," he uttered in a softer tone. "I've known since the first time I saw you, Aurora, the bond is genuine. I sense it, and you do too in your heart." I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Part of me wanted to deny his clism and ignore the connection he was making, but the other part of me, the one I was most afraid of, saw that what he was saying was true. "How?" I murmured. "You can't be certain of this. You barely know me." His gaze never left mine as he stepped closer. "Because I've known you for a lot longer than you have. The instant I smelled you, I knew you were mine. Whether I know you or not, what matters is that you're my mate." The ground felt like it was shifting beneath me, and I stumbled back, my heart pounding. No, things does not happen that way. Mates should experience the bond on an equal basis. No, stop arguing with me, Aurora. He cut in a firm but kind voice. You have been avoiding it and not accepting it, but Aurora, the bond is there. It is real. I found it difficult to breathe. The certainty in his words suffocated me as they pressed in. My voice was barely audible as I asked, "Why didn't I know sooner? Are you trying to keep me here by lying that I was your mate?" I noticed a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes for the first time as his gaze softened. The bond may not always be felt right away. It may take a while for one or both partners to accept it. That does not mean it isn't real. You are mine to claim. Aurora. I averted my gaze, my thoughts racing. This was too much to handle. I already had a complicated life, so the idea of having a mate, especially one as strong as Callum, was too much for me. I can't be your mate, I said. Are you rejecting the boss, tilting his head? If I were you, I wouldn't do that. A promise and a secret. Aurora's pav. Alpha Callum's gaze, which was fixed on me, it seems to be everywhere. It was evident in every square inch of the room, which exuded strength and authority. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if it had been charged by his very presence, and I couldn't bring myself to look at him or answer his question. I gripped my hands in my lap to steady it from shaking as I sat rigidly on the bed across from him. I managed to look around the room and took in elaborate mahogany furnishings, shelves brimming with vintage books and pack artifacts, and a sizable desk behind him. I never knew all this was in the room until now. His eyes peered at me like a predator waiting its victim, waiting for me to answer. You're trembling, he said in a low, scathing voice that showed no concern. As if my uneasiness amused him, a smirk formed on his lips. My throat felt as dry as sandpaper as I took a deep swallow. I'm not shaking. My voice wavered, but I was telling the truth. He lied, a deep, haughty laugh that made my spine tingle. Aurora, don't lie to me. You are scared because you just rejected the bond and you fear that I might get you punished. My fingers gripped the material of my dress as I looked down at my lap. He was in the right. Though fear coiled like a vice around my heart, I was more afraid of the weight of everything that had led me to him. Now I was thinking it was better I had stayed with my stepmother instead. You know why you're here, don't you? I wasn't driving around that night looking for an Omega to save, he said, his tone very sharp. I gave a feeble shake of my head, avoiding eye contact. No, I don't. His voice was so thunderous that there was no room for disobedience as he ordered. Look at me. I reluctantly raised my gaze to his. His eyes were calculating and icy, but I couldn't quite place what else was there. With a softer but equally authoritative tone, he continued, My father made a promise. When this pack was most in danger from rogues years ago, and your father was by my father's side, he gave up everything and fought bravely. My father promised to protect you when he passed away, to make certain that you were taken care of, and for you to become my mate. My breath caught in my throat as the words closed in on me like a physical blow. My dad? A warrior? A guardian? The man I remembered had been gentle and kind, an Omega who made me sleep while singing lullabies. Was he really the man Callum had described? You're lying, I said in a whisper, but I knew it was pointless, because even as it seems, Callum had no reason to lie. He clenched his jaw and narrowed his eyes. I'm telling the truth, Aurora. My father's word was law, and I keep my end of the bargain. No matter how you feel about it, you were destined to be my mate, Luna. Sweetheart, so you better accept it. His words made me feel even more confused and panicked. Luna? Me? The thought itself was absurd. I was a nobody, an Omega. One of the lowest lows. I wasn't capable of leading a pack, much less standing next to someone like Callum. I can't. I muttered, my voice shaking. I'm not who you thought I was. I'm not powerful, strong, or... Enough, he broke in, his voice piercing and impatient. I believe you to be exactly who you are. All you've done is let the world tell you otherwise. I'm acting on my father's words to make you my mate. As tears pricked my eyes, my lips trembled. My voice broke as I continued. You don't understand, Callum. I'm not like you. I paused, the words catching in my throat. Am not. He scoffed and leaned closer, his eyes filling mine with such intensity that it made my stomach turn. Not what? Worthy? He asked. Aurora, let me clarify something for you. I don't judge worth by status or strength. The moon goddess herself picked you to be my mate. That is the only thing that counts. Tears were streaming down my cheeks as I gave a firm shake of my head. It's not really that easy. The tension in his jaw showed his frustration. Would you just stop all this whining? He said angrily, but his voice was dangerously calm as he came closer. Then make me understand. I was having trouble breathing as the room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing down. Like a storm cloud hovering over me, my secret was ready to burst at any second. Callum looked as my hands automatically went to my stomach in a protective gesture. His gaze dropped to where my hands were resting, and his eyes narrowed. His voice was low and menacing as he questioned. Aurora, what are you hiding? I refused to say anything and shook my head. Tell him, surely he must know, but fear silenced me, grabbing at my throat. Speak, he commanded, his voice now growling with alpha-level authority. Impregnant, I blurted out before I could say anything to stop myself. Nothing. There was no sound in the room except the ticking of the wall clock. With an unreadable expression, Callum gazed at me. Whose is it? He said in a dangerously low voice. I paused, my hands gripping my dress more tightly. It doesn't matter. I muttered, barely audible. It's my burden, I have to carry it. Then he laughed. A chilly, sardonic laugh that made my skin crawl. Your burden? He asked again in a contemptuous tone. You really think I'm a fool, right? Is this the best you can come up with? Lying about being pregnant? His voice was poisonous and I winced, tears welling up in my eyes. Callum, I didn't ask for this. I sobbed, my voice cracking. I'm not lying and interested in being your Luna or mate. I never requested any of this. His eyes were burning with rage and his jaw tensed. Really, he remarked icily. Aurora, you are mine, whether you like it or not. And if you think I believe this fairy tale, then you should think of something better. I stood up suddenly, wiping away my tears with shaking hands. You don't own me, I said in a trembling but defiant voice. Even though we are mates like you said, that doesn't give you any control over me. With an overwhelming presence, Callum stepped closer. Control, he asked in a low growl. Aurora, this isn't about control. This concerns mostly you. You can reject the bond if you want, but just know that if you go back there, you won't live to see another day. My heart was thumping in my chest as I gazed at him. He spoke harshly, but there was a glimmer of something different in his eyes, something gentler, almost vulnerable. I don't need your pity or protection, I muttered, barely raising my voice above a whisper. He laughed, he shook his head and his face hardened. Pity? You think I pity you? He asked. I underestimated your level of stupidity. Despite how painful the words were, I didn't back down. With a frustrated tone, Then, Callum, what do you want from me? What's stopping you from just leaving me alone? I said. Because I can't, he said plainly in a concluding tone. I own you, Aurora. I own you whether you like it or not, and I keep what is mine. I started to argue, but I was silenced by his glate. He was asserting his claim and dominance without leaving any room for compromise. He wasn't requesting my acceptance or approval either. What do you mean by I won't survive another day if I go back to the pack? What do you mean by that? I half yelled, staring at him. It means that your stepmother planned on killing you just as she killed your mother and married your father, and then kill him to have control over everything he owns. I don't believe you, I gasped. Suit yourself, princess, he drawled. You might not believe it now, he added, his tone slightly lowering. But you were supposed to be here with me. It was intended for you to be Luna, and I'll stop at nothing to ensure that happens. Fresh tears streamed down my cheeks as I shook my head. It's not that easy, I muttered, my voice cracking. His tone was surprisingly soft as he stated. It never is. In fact, being an alpha is a burden too, but that does not imply that it is impossible to make you my mate. I might use force. I gave myself some assurance that this was some suck joke and he would let me go. But something in me kept telling me that there must be a reason why he was forcing this bond on me. not just because he was following his father's orders. But the fear persisted, gnawing at the corners of my heart. At last, with a trembling voice, I said, "I need time." Callum gave a nod, but his face was still unreadable. In a firm tone, he said, "Take as much time as you need, but Aurora, know that you are mine and nothing will alter that. If I agree to be your mate," I said, my voice shaking just when he turned to leave me alone with the thoughts. As the tears on my face dried up, slowly he turned, his gaze fixed on me, his icy eyes holding me in place, and I swallowed painfully, trying to avoid his gaze, wondering why some as handsome as he was would be so wicked. Bound by promises, not love, only the sound of my erratic breathing could be heard, filling the room in a thick silence. My knees were on the verge of giving out under the weight of his gaze as I stood in front of him. "Protection and all the luxuries you could ever think of," Alpha Callum said in an emotionless tone. "But one more thing," he said, raising a finger up, and I saw triumph in his eyes. "This will be done under a contract." He said. Ab took a seat, watching me closely. Leaning back in his chair, he exuded a commanding presence that filled the entire room. His piercing, perceptive gaze seemed to be trying to extract every thought from me, as if thinking I was trying to outsmart him. The lump that was growing in my throat made it difficult for me to swallow. "A contract?" I asked again, trying to steady my trembling voice. "Yes," he said abruptly, a small, almost contemptuous smirk curling his lips. "A formal agreement will serve as our bond. There will be strict boundaries and rules. This mating is not motivated by sentimentality or love. It is merely a duty." Then he smiled. "Making you my mate will help me get my other inheritance as the alpha." "Other inheritance? You didn't," I said, confused, but he raised his palm, cutting me off. His remarks sliced through my hopes, brittle strands like a blade. "Mates are supposed to love each other." I muttered, my frustration seeping into my voice. His expression became unreadable as his eyes darkened. I even thought that he would react and explain the callousness of his order, but all he did was look at me in silence. No matter what he said or wanted to say, the weight of his silence was greater than anything. "Is that not what the moon goddess intended?" I demanded, my voice failing from the stress I had gone through and my anguish and frustration. "For mates to complete one another? To share something more profound than this?" He leaned forward until his elbows were resting on the desk and let out a sharp exhale. "I am not a man who lets fate control my behavior, even though the moon goddess may have picked us." Then he pinched the bridge of his nose, like speaking to me was a burden. "You speak like the moon goddess is my grandmother." Then he exhaled. "I don't plan on engaging in fairy tales and love, just following orders." I felt my heart tighten. "Fairy tales?" I repeated with a tone of bitterness that even surprised me. "You make it seem so unimportant. Do you think that I will find it easy to accept this, to stand here and watch you turn something holy into a business deal?" Callum's eyes became hard and his jaw tensed. "Ease or fairness are not at issue here. This is about keeping a promise my father made to you, which is an obligation. No more, no less." I let out a bitter laugh. "And you think that makes it better? It will be easy for me to handle knowing that I'm just a debt you're paying back?" "I didn't ask for your approval," he stated icily, without allowing any room for debate. "Aurora, this cannot be decided. It's a duty. Under the conditions I establish, you will be my Luna." I experienced a wave of rage, but it was swiftly overtaken by a shattering sense of hopelessness. Why now? Why me? I forced myself to look into his eyes and asked, my voice hollow, "And what are these terms?" Arguing with him was a waste of time. It was better to accept this. This was my chance to enjoy luxury. I had suffered, abused, and kicked around by my stepmother and stepsister. Going back wasn't an option. Besides, no one would know that the Alpha's mate was an Omega. If this was the way the moon goddess was going to answer my prayer, then so be it. His voice was void of warmth and was so informal, as if we were talking about some routine business deal, and he leaned back in his chair again. "First of all, there won't be any entanglements. As I so delicately stated, no catching of feelings. We'll have a professional bond, operational, not much more." My pride prevented me from showing him how deeply hurt I was, even though the words were a dagger to my chest, but I made myself nod. Even though the words felt like ash on my tongue, I said softly when he stares at me, "Understood." Secondly, he added his voice as piercing and uncompromising as ever. "You will fulfill the responsibilities of a Luna. In addition to leading the pack with me, you will stand for courage and solidarity and carry out your assigned duties. Not any more, not any less." I suppressed the urge to scream as I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "And what about me?" I said, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. "What about my happiness and what do I want?" Callum's face softened for the smallest of seconds, but it vanished as fast as it had appeared. "Happiness?" he said in a mocking fashion. "Are you deaf, Care? You just haven't been listening, Aurora. When I mentioned luxuries at its finest, what do you think I was referring to?" Startled by the unexpected vulnerability in his words, I blinked. "I apologize sincerely, and I perfectly understand now, but what do you want too?" That's when he stood up, his massive frame looming over me as he moved across the room. In a final tone, he stated, "What I want is irrelevant. Want is not the issue here. It all comes down to duty, and we will be united tomorrow as mates. This conversation will end when you take your place as my Luna, and you will have everything you want." As the finality of his words swept over me like a tidal wave, my breath caught. "Tomorrow?" I repeated, my voice hardly audible. "Yes," he said, his eyes unblinking. "The ceremony is scheduled to begin at sunrise. Prepare, little mate." He smirked. The ground seemed to have been torn out from under me. My head was spinning, ideas crashing into each other in a maddening whirlpool. Ideas of how to escape from all this, too soon. I wasn't prepared. "Callum," I said, my voice cracking. Please, Aurora, this is not debatable. You will follow instructions." He broke off, his voice as icy and uncompromising as steel. "If there's anything you need, you can say it. Your favorite color. Do you want to wear a shimmering blue dress or yellow dress?" Was he taunting me? Tears were burning at the corners of my eyes. I fought the urge to cry. I averted my gaze because I could no longer stand this arrogant fellow. His words and the knowledge of what lay ahead weighed heavily on my heart as he left the room. Was I really destined to be a slave to a man who viewed me as nothing more than a duty? Sitting by myself in my room that night, the silence felt like a physical burden. A storm of doubt, fear, and a glimmer of hope that I couldn't quite put out swirled through my mind. My father, the man Callum said had fought alongside his own, and given his all to defend this pack, came to my mind. Did he really want me to be forced into a life I hadn't chosen and confined to a man who didn't think of me as anything more than a responsibility? Instinctively, something that had come naturally to me since I found out that life was developing inside of me, I put a hand on my stomach. How could I provide this child with a future? Callum was standing in the doorway when I turned around as the door creaked open, the sound jolting me out of my thoughts. His presence remained commanding, and his expression was unreadable. I tried my hardest to sound strong, but my voice was shaking as I asked him, avoiding his gaze, "What do you want?" "I came to make sure you realize how serious what's coming is," he said in a clipped voice. "I understand," I said, just raising my voice above a whisper. His eyes grew a little softer as he hesitated. With a softer tone, he asked, pushing further, annoying me on purpose. Do you really get what it means to be my Luna, my mate?" I swallowed hard and looked him in the eye with all the anger I could muster. "I realize I have no other option," I retorted. "And I think reading a book or two on how to be the best Luna ever will be sweet," I said sarcastically. He remained silent for a while, looking into my eyes, as if he were trying to find the answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Then, as usual, a smirk came on his lips. "The maid will serve dinner soon. You better have something to eat." He turned and walked away without saying anything more, the door softly closing behind him. When the quiet returned, I let the tears that I had been suppressing spill out. Everything would change tomorrow. I would be mates to a man who didn't love me tomorrow. I sighed. This was how my life would change. Every day I had hoped that the moon goddess would give me what I wished for, what I desired. I had prayed to be far away from my stepmother and her wickedness, to find a mate. But I did leave home, I did get a mate, but it wasn't just as I had wished. The moon goddess had heard my prayers, but I guess I wasn't just specific on how I wanted my wish to be. Is this what it is? The sun rose reluctantly, Bit's tame rays filtering through the thick curtains of the guest room that had been set up for me. When I awoke, I heard maids moving quietly into the room, carrying cloths, jewelry, and fragrances in their arms. They moved with practiced efficiency, whispering to each other, as if a louder sound would break the brittle peace I had forged during the restless night. At first I was confused, wondering what was happening until I realized I was getting mated to one of the arrogant alpha that ever lived. My hands were firmly clasped in my lap. I sat on the edge of the bed. The aroma of rose and lavender filled the air, and the responsibility of the day weighed me down like a chain of iron. I just wished this was all a dream. "My lady," one of the maids said in a soft but firm tone, "we have to get you ready. To make sure you are dressed appropriately for the event, the Alpha has sent instructions." The word stung. It served as a reminder of how transactional the entire arrangement was. I wanted to weep. I gave them a silent nod, letting them lead me to the vanity where a lavish gown was waiting. With the fabric glistening like starlight, it was a silver and sapphire masterpiece. The sleeves fell down my arms in gentle, dreamy waves, and the corset was so tight that it felt like I might break under the pressure. "You look lovely, my lady," another maid whispered and pinned a delicate tiara to my hair, which they had braided and twisted into a beautiful pattern. I repeated the word beautiful even though it sounded strange to me. Unrecognizable. My reflection stared back at me, but the surface was a girl who was scared and broken, but the woman in the mirror was elegant, composed, and completely different. The great hall, an impressive place with lavish decor, served as the venue for the bonding ceremony. The light from the crystal-dripping chandeliers created broken rainbows on the marble floors. The entire pack and distinguished guests filled the room, and their whispered conversations, clicking of glasses, and laughter that rose and fell made me feel so scared. I took slow, deliberate steps as I entered the hall, one of the enders of the pack leading Mr. Everybody was watching me, and their intense gaze and smiles made me blush. I tried to maintain a steady breathing as my heart pounded in my chest. Alpha Callum stood at the far end of the hall, commanding attention with his presence. He wore a ceremonial clothing, a dark cloak draped over his broad shoulders and embroidered with the pack's symbols. His eyes were cold and expressionless as they met mine, and his face was unreadable. B wasn't even smiling. I walked toward him, each stride a march toward an unknown future. He held out his hand to me when I finally got to him, guiding me to stand in front of the officiant with a firm, unwavering touch. The bonding ritual's ancient words reverberated throughout the hall as the ceremony got started. I could hardly hear them because my mind was racing with uncertainties and anxieties. As he recited his vows, Callum's voice was steady, and his tone was emotionless, but filled with a quiet authority that broke my heart. I hesitated for a second when it was my turn to speak, my throat constricted from the pressure of expectation. The words that would bind me to him were then recited by me after I found my voice, soft but determined. "You are bound together as mates as Luna and Alpha with this bond," the officiant declared. "May your marriage honor the moon goddess and give the pack strength." With a stoic expression, Callum turned to face me. In a low, authoritative voice, he declared, "You are now my mate and my Luna." I heard a hollow ringing sound as the room erupted in applause. I feigned a smile because it was tiring to keep my cool. There was a flurry of formalities and introductions at the reception that followed. As officials, supporters, and pack members came to congratulate us, Callum and I stood, his hands wrapped around mine, and he was smiling at me, a smile that didn't reach his eyes like I was the best thing that ever happened to him. He maintained the same unreadable expression on his face. He spoke softly to another guest, and as we walked away looking straight ahead, "You handled yourself well. Thank you." I said, my voice just as quiet. As the hours went by, the crowd became denser and the sounds of conversation and laughter blended into a frenzied blur. Later on, I realized that Callum was no longer with me. He had walked away to greet a guest or two. I looked around, trying to find him in the crowd, but he was not there. I started to feel anxious, and a knot of uneasiness started to form in my stomach. I excused myself from the group I was talking to and started squeezing my way through the crowd, looking at everyone. The alpha was the one hosting this meeting. Where could he have gone? He wouldn't have left silently. We were supposed to be together. My heels clicked softly on the marble floors as I walked through the corridors. The distant hum of the celebration faded into silence as I continued to move farther away. Then I saw him, or rather stumbled upon him, when I turned a corner of a hallway upstairs. The scene in front of me stopped me cold. Callum stood, his back to me, his hands around the waist of a woman who was equally as gorgeous as anything I had ever seen or imagined. Her gown clung to her figure in a way that seemed purposefully provocative, and her golden hair fell down her back. Before she leaned in to meet his hot, passionate kiss, she raised her head to meet his gaze and curled her lips into a sensual smile. Then it happened. He kissed her with all the ferocity, and she kissed him. Back. There was a loud, sharp crash as the glass of wine I was holding fell out of my hands and hit the floor. Callum's eyes narrowed as he turned abruptly as he heard startling sound. "Aurora?" he said. His voice was calm but tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Annoyance? Regret? I had trouble breathing. I felt as if the walls were closing in on me and the air was oppressively heavy. My chest was tight and I thought that I would pass out. I stuttered. "I am sorry." And stepped back. "I'm sorry for interrupting you." The woman smirked as her amused and contemptuous eyes darted over me. "Is she the one?" she asked in a condescending tone. Callum's jaw tensed. He remained silent. Tears threatened to spill, but I resisted the urge to do so. No, not here. In front of him, no. Without saying another word, I turned and ran away down the corridor, my heart tight and eyes blurry. I ran into my room with the speed even a wind would envy, the door slamming behind me. I finally let the tears that I had been suppressing to spill out as I fell onto the bed. After everything, agreeing to this, thinking that my life would change, he had left me to go with another woman like the words of the vows meant nothing. I couldn't get the picture of him kissing her out of my head. It was a cruel reminder of how unimportant I was to him. He had stated earlier, "This is not about love." And I now realized how true those words were. What was I even thinking? I was startled by a knock on the door. I sat up and quickly wiped away my tears. "Who is it?" I called in a raspy voice. "This me," Callum said, maintaining that stupid voice I hated listening to. My instincts told me to tell him to get out, but rather I got up and opened the door, looking him in the eye with all the strength I could muster. "What do you want?" I asked in a chilly voice. Closing the door behind him, he entered the room. "We need to talk," he said simply. "There's nothing to talk about. You expressed your emotions quite clearly," I yelled, crossing my arms over my chest. "It's not as you thinking." His face grew serious. I raised my voice and demanded, "Then what is it?" "Because it appeared that you were eager to hurl yourself at a different woman even before the ceremony is over." Pinching the bridge of his nose, he sighed as if the conversation were a bother. "Aurora, this is exactly why I establish boundaries. You're making too many assumptions about this." "Boundaries?" I said again, my voice trembling with rage. "You are my mate, or have you forgotten?" His eyes were hard as he looked at me. "I still remember, but as previously stated, this mating is not the result of love. You were aware of that." I didn't want him to see how hurtful his words were. They were a slap in the face. "Maybe you ought to have made that more obvious when you kissed her," I said, my voice brimming with bitterness. "Greta is not just any woman, she's my childhood sweetheart." "What?" I gasped. A warning. It was not the weight of the room and everything, or the imposing mahogany desk that made the office feel oppressive. It was Aurora was here. As she waited for me to speak, her hands were clasped tightly together, and her delicate features revealed her shock and surprise. She just didn't know how much I hated all this. We arrived at this point per my father's orders, and I now had to deal with this sham of a marriage. I stood up straight and gave her a chilly look. Aurora, let me be very clear about one thing. I said, my voice even. This marriage is not built on love. There was a brief moment of bewilderment on her face as her brows furrowed. I don't love you. This arrangement and all that exists is just a duty to the pack and to my father's desires. That's that. I went on using a harsher tone. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to reply but wasn't sure how, and the shock in her eyes turned into a searing sting. I continued. You're my mate, but don't think for a second that this bond means anything to me. No. I saw how she forced herself to stand upright in spite of my harsh words, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I leaned back in my chair and reminded her. You agreed to this. So let's do it this way. Play your part very well. As a couple, we are incredibly in love, and that's what I want the pack to see. What they will be looking forward to it, an Alpha and Luna in love. At last, Aurora's voice, shaky yet soft, came through. Is this what all this is? Of course it is, I said in a tone that was colder than I had intended. Both of us will have our own space. I won't give you any more than that. She tensed her jaw, but she refused to give up. Why are you doing this? Why can't you wait until all this is over and you do what you just did? Because I don't want you to make any assumptions. I snapped back. To make assumptions that I love you, don't bother me with questions. Don't attempt to be the devoted mate. Don't even consider the possibility that this arrangement will become more than it is. I'm just obeying my father's last wish. She wanted to say something, but her silence spoke louder. She gazed at me, her eyes displaying a mix of defiance and hurt. And another thing, I said quietly. You're not to tell anyone about this at all. The pack must believe that we are deeply in love. At the first sign of weakness or whatever, everything will collapse. Am I understood? Aurora nodded, though her lips formed a thin line. Good, I said, getting up from my seat. Everyone will benefit from this. Eventually you will thank me and know that I'm doing you a great favor. She remained silent and stared at the floor as if she were looking for support from the soiled carpet. There was a brief, odd twinge of guilt in my chest. It vanished as swiftly as it appeared, buried under the burden of my alpha duties and years of hiding my emotions. I'll announce the necessary information to the pack tomorrow, I said, ignoring her. You can leave now and don't you dare fight or confront Greta. Without saying another word, she turned on her heel, leaving the room in anger. For a long time after she had left, I was just left with my thoughts and feeling kind of guilty. After she left, the door clicked shut. I let out a long breath while stroking my hair. I could hear my father's voice, his commands unambiguous and hard. Callum, she's your mate. It makes no difference how you feel. Together you will lead this pack after you marry her. Discussion is over. All I ever wanted was to make Greta my mate, and now I had to live the one I didn't desired. I knew deep in my mind that it could really take a long time before I could get to love Aurora. Having Greta back from her travels and finding out that I had been mated to an ordinary Omega had broken her heart. I had felt so bad that I had broken Greta's heart, and I was feeling equally bad that Aurora wasn't feeling so sad because of the way I had treated her. Right now, I felt like I was at a crossroad and didn't know what to do. I poured myself a glass of vodka and drowned it down all in one gulp. I didn't want to think about anything else, but the fact that my father had made me have Aurora as my mate was so annoying to me. Tomorrow there was going to be an announcement, and after that, there will be a lot of explaining to do to Greta and to Aurora separately. Both women might be thinking that I had betrayed them, but if only they knew that it wasn't my intention to do that. Even though I never loved Aurora, I would never turn away from the pack. Protecting her felt like a duty I had to do, and also obeying my father's last words. Greta had told me there was something urgent she wanted to tell me, and that was the reason why she was back so soon. As I took another swing from the bottle, I wondered what it was that she wanted to say. I could still remember the sadness and betrayal in her eyes when she found out that Aurora was now my mate. and if there was one thing I had to do to make Greta happy was to strip Aurora from the title of a Luna and give it to her. I had to do this as soon as possible, only I have to make her happy. Yes, I love Greta, and making her happy was my priority. The Luna. A fog of frustration and self-blame hung over the remainder of the evening. I was haunted by Aurora's face because of her wide and vulnerable eyes, which were making a strong effort to hide the hurt my words had caused, even though I knew she wanted to tear up. I had wanted to be firm in order to set the boundaries of our agreement, but I had instead hit harder than I had wanted to. Trying to get my thoughts straight, I put on my jacket and walked out of my office. The party had long ended and everyone had gone home, but this night some of the guards were in training. It had rained a little, and there was a slight earthy and piney smell to the crisp night air. As I left my room, my mind was a raging storm. My guilt persisted despite my best efforts to think of something else other than Aurora and what I had said to her. It wasn't my fault, though. I hadn't chosen this life. The expectations and legacy of my father had shaped me into the alpha I am today. I just couldn't afford to have both women struggling for my attention. It felt so annoying and so confusing. In minutes, I was so close to the training grounds where a group of warriors were finishing up their late-night training. When Marcus, my beta, came over to me, his keen eyes could tell how I was feeling right away. He asked, settling into a step next to me, "Hard day?" "That's an understatement." Marcus gave a little laugh. "Let me make a guess. Is it related to your new Luna?" He just grinned when I gave him a warning look. "You're obviously not happy with the arrangement," he remarked. "She appears to be decent, though. She may be quiet, but she looks smart and beautiful. Here she will find her position by your side." I laughed. "She isn't trying to find her place here. Keeping the pack stable is the goal." "Do you believe that treating her like a burden will help with that?" he asked. I didn't want to acknowledge how hard his words struck me. "Stop it, Marcus," I snapped. He held up his hands in a gesture of self-denial. Okay. But keep in mind that strength doesn't always appear as you might expect. Do not underestimate her." I didn't answer, and Marcus finally left to let me think on my own. When I got back to the pack house, Aurora's room was completely dark and empty. I stopped in front of her door and gazed at the dim line of light behind it. I slapped my temples softly. I had mistaken her room for another. After a long pause, I lifted my hand to knock, but I hesitated. What would I even say? "Thank you for letting me explain to you that info not love you. I apologize for making you feel inadequate." The words seemed unnatural and hateful. Instead, I turned and walked to my own room, closing the door after me. The pack gathered in the hall for the formal announcement the following morning. There was a low hum of anticipation in the crowd as they spoke with excitement. Aurora was standing next to me, and I could see she hadn't slept much last night. Her hair was pulled back in a straightforward braid, and she wore a pale blue dress that accentuated the warmth of her face. She appeared to be exactly the Luna they had envisioned. I could see the cracks, though. Her hands quivered just a little, but she avoided looking at me and continued to look straight ahead. For a brief moment, I pondered whether I had pushed her too far when I saw her crying last night. As I moved forward, my voice reverberated throughout the hall and the crowd fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I said. "Ensuring the strength and unity of our pack is my responsibility as your alpha. It gives me great pleasure to present Aurora your new Luna." After that, there was polite applause, but I hardly heard it. But Aurora came forward with a gentle smile that stopped short of her eyes. But I didn't want to look at her. She nodded politely, her movements elegant but aloof. The remainder of the ceremony was a haze of empty declarations and formalities. Aurora vanished into the crowd after it was over, and I didn't bother to follow her. She was sitting on a stone bench close to the wood's edge in the garden when I saw her hours later. Her hands were clenched in her lap and her shoulders were hunched. My footsteps were muffled by the soft grass as I walked up quietly. Even when I stood directly next to her, she didn't raise her head. My voice was rough as I remarked, "You handled yourself well today." At last, her face was unreadable as she looked up at me. Did I? Yes, I replied. All that matters is that the pack respects you, she laughed bitterly. Is that all? What about trust? Or do you mean love? I became rigid. As I previously told, she interrupted, raising her voice. I know. You don't care about me. No, you don't. But Callum, do you even respect me, or am I merely a pawn in this game you're playing with your dead father? I didn't want to show that her words touched a nerve. You're going too far, I said icily. Oh, please spare me, she retorted. There was an overwhelming silence. Her eyes were burning with a mixture of despair and rage, and her chest was rising and falling quickly. I found myself unsure of what to say for the first time. Aurora suddenly stood up, her hands at her sides, balled into fists. Callum, I didn't ask for this. I didn't request to be your Luna or mate. I will not, however, allow you to treat me as if I am unimportant or that I do not exist. Her words sounded in my ears as I stood by all alone in the garden after she turned and left. The image of her blazing eyes and the conviction in her voice lingered in my mind as I sat in my office later that evening, gazing at the papers stacked on my desk. Perhaps Marcus was right. Aurora was not a helpless person. She wasn't weak. She also refused to put up with me dictating the conditions of this marriage. She might be an Omega, but she knows what she wanted. I felt something I couldn't quite put my finger on, flicker for the first time in my mind. Was it curiosity, regret, or guilt? How long would it take me to find out who Aurora really was? Greta. The dining room's large windows let in the morning sun, which gave the well-arranged table a golden hue. I could hardly detect the smell of freshly brewed coffee and freshly baked bread in the air, but my attention was drawn to Callum, who was sitting across from me and reading a newspaper, as if the chaos of the outside world didn't match the raging storm inside of me. As if what had happened yesterday didn't just happen, and it was all a movie to him. We didn't say much, and I wasn't sure if that was the customary cozy silence or something more serious. I wasn't going to be the one to break it in any case. I was too angry to. Rather, I picked at the edges of my toast while feigning interest in the designs on my plate. Every step was louder and more annoying than the last, and the silence was broken by the click of heels on the wooden floor, and I wondered who could have thought of destroying the early morning peace and quiet. I knew who it was without having to look up. Callum, darling, she chirped in a sickly, sugary voice that made my teeth ache. My hands tightened around the fork in my hand as I froze, and I slowly looked up and saw Greta standing in the doorway, looking stunning. Her blonde hair fell in flawless waves over her shoulders, and her dress, a beige one that looked too expensive, fit her body like it was custom-made. She knew that she had the appearance of someone who should have been in a magazine, and so was so vain about it. Callum got up and gave Greta a side hug. His face briefly displayed astonishment before turning into a kind grin. I flinched. She cooed and strode across the room as if she owned it, asking if anyone was surprised to see her. Callum's tone softened as he smiled. Of course, I thought you wouldn't have breakfast yet. I felt sick to my stomach as he leaned in to pour her a glass of milk. I imagined Greta's flawless face as I stabbed my fork into the scrambled eggs on my plate. I couldn't stay away. She cooed and took the glass with elegant practice. Not after learning that you had take a walk later. I don't want to leave now. As always, this place feels like home. My chest tightened and rage brewed beneath the surface. Home? This was my home, not hers. I wanted to yell this to her, but kept quiet. I felt my nerves tingle when Callum laughed. You can always stay here as long as you want, he said. She nodded, her voice brimming with deceptive innocence. Thanks, sweetie. Sweetie? Now that was just too much. My appetite had completely disappeared, but I made myself eat more. The way she stayed too close to Callum made me want to scream, and every word she said felt like a needle pricking my skin. At last, Greta looked at me and said, "And who's this?" Her smile tightened just a bit as her blue eyes looked me over from head to toe. Really? Hadn't she seen me last night when she was kissing Callum like her life deepened on it? I put down my fork and looked directly at her. My name is Aurora. Oh, I see, the new one. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile as she said, his new mate. Despite my clenched jaw, I made an effort to look courteous. Yes, Callum and I are together. Greta seemed not to have heard me at all as her gaze quickly returned to Callum. It's wonderful to see you in good health. You look even better than I remembered, which alarmed me because I thought being an alpha and getting married would weigh you down. Callum rubbed the back of his neck and said, Thanks, Greta. Obviously uneasy with her compliment, but she didn't stop. Her hand brushed his arm as she stepped closer. Do you still recall all of our past adventures, such as skipping stones by the lake and running through the woods? Also that summer when we... Callum interrupted, grinning sheepishly. Greta, perhaps later we can catch up? She laughed lightly. Oh, of course, she said. My intention was not to interrupt you both. Seeing you was something I was eager to do. Interrupt? It was an understatement. With sharper movements than I had planned, I pushed my chair back and stood up. They both looked in my direction. Pardon me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't feel particularly hungry anymore. Callum's brow furrowed. Aurora? Is something wrong? I avoided eye contact with him. I couldn't just look at him. Not while Greta was like she had every right to be there, standing there with her immaculately manicured nails still resting on his arm. Curtly, I said. I'm fine, I said curtly. Enjoy the breakfast. I turned and left the room without waiting for a reply, my footsteps sounding down the corridor. My calmness vanished the instant I was out of sight. To quiet the storm raging inside of me, I leaned against the wall and took deep breaths. And she was back. Everyone assumed Callum would end up with Greta, the golden girl and childhood sweetheart. They might not have been mistaken based on his smile and attitude toward her. I tried to block out the images that were flashing through my head by closing my eyes. She seemed to know exactly how to worm her way back into his life. I could see it on the way he looked at her, the way she touched him and other things. I walked to the window and looked out of the packed grounds below. I wasn't jealous. No, why should I? I didn't become Callum's mate out of love or fate. I exhaled. I was just feeling so insecure. I'm still his Luna. I turned away from the window, discarding the thoughts, and peeked through the door, thinking of going downstairs and thought over it. I didn't want to see Callum. I had just shut my door when I heard footsteps coming from behind me. It had to be Greta, of course. I knew it had to be her. The sound of her heels on the marble were unmistakable. With the same sweet tone that made my skin crawl, she called out to me. Aurora. She didn't even have the decency to knock, acting like she owed the whole pack and was already Luna. I walked across the room while feigning to arrange the books on the dresser, not bothering to look at her stupid face. Oh, moon goddess, she was so annoying. Clicking her heels on the floor more loudly than before, she entered without being invited and walked up to me. I hope I'm not interrupting. She said sweetly, but we both knew was, and she didn't give a damn about it. I turned away from Greta and said, my voice kind of low, and I tried not to sound so angry. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry either. What do you want? My grip on the dresser's edge was anything but calm, despite the calmness in my voice. Oh, nothing, she muttered in an informal manner. Better, I said under my breath. I simply felt that we ought to speak briefly. You know, girl to girl, she said, grinning like a Cheshire cat. I finally crossed my arms and looked at her and furrowed my brows, my lips pressed tight together. I'm paying attention. Go on with it quickly. With a smile plastered on her thin, sensual lips, she cocked her head as if assessing me. You really must be over the moon, huh? She started sounding phony and sympathetic. I'm talking about being with someone like Callum. It's not simple, is it? Without letting her see the weakness in me, I looked away and I curtly replied. I'm managing just fine. You are, of course, she said quickly, taking a step forward. But you see, Callum and I have a long history together. We have known one another since we were young. We were kind of raised together. She continued, staring deeply into my eyes, but her eyes hems venom and anger. Every word she said was a purposeful jab designed to make me realize how out of place I was, to make me so angry. Trying to smile, I said, forcing the words out. "That's nice. You must have some amazing memories." "Oh, we do," she said with sparkling eyes. "He used to call me as his little sunshine." She smiled again and flipped her blonde hair. "We had all these plans, isn't that cute? Places we would visit and things we would do, all that. But you see, life happened, isn't it?" Even though my chest constricted, I maintained a neutral expression. "Yes, life does happen. People change as they get older." I smiled. I returned her smile. A brief moment of hesitation caused her smile to waver, but she quickly got over it. "It's true, but some things never change, just as how Callum gazes at me. Was that something you noticed during our earlier conversation?" "You saw it too, right?" My fingers dug into my palms as I balled my fists. "Serious, I was thinking of something better and important that I didn't pay much attention. Breakfast was sumptuous, and I didn't want anything to mess with it." She stared at me for a while and nursed into laughter. The sound of her faint laughter irritated me. "Aurora, you're so hilarious. I understand how Callum finds you. Intriguing," she said, looking me over like an orphaned rabbit. My patience was wearing thin, so I asked after exhaling, "Is there a point to this conversation?" Greta moved closer, her gaze meeting mine. "All I want is for you to understand something. There is an unbreakable bond between Callum and me. I know in my heart that he still loves me, even though he may be with you now. And if he must make a choice—" She trailed off with a clear meaning, but not knowing what else to say. A stab of pain went through my chest, but I kept it hidden from her. Rather, I sat up straight and looked her in the eye. "Callum would be with you if that was his desire, but he isn't. He's with me, so stop being a baby." For the first time, I noticed a glimmer of doubt in her eyes, and her smile faltered. She muttered the words almost to herself. "Well, see about that, Aurora." She said my name like a curse. I moved in closer, covering the distance between us. "I want to clarify something, Greta," I said, my tone sharp. "No matter how many memories you have of Callum or how much you believe he loved you over me or whatever, I don't care. I am currently the one by his side, his mate and Luna. So don't expect me to give in, but feel free to play your little games." For a second, neither of us spoke. The room was tense, and there were many unspoken challenges in the silence, and I found myself asking how I had gotten into this mess. My mate was supposed to love me. Isn't that how it works? At last, Greta chuckled, but it was a hollow sound that missed her eyes. "You have a feisty spirit, I'll give you that. But let's see how long you can keep him around." Leaving the door slightly open, she turned on her heel and left. I fell onto the edge of the bed as soon as she was gone, my hands shaking with a mix of frustration and rage. I wished I had slapped her. One thing Greta was correct about was that Callum and I didn't have the same past, and he might not love me now. But I wasn't going to let her win, though. But not without a struggle. Miracles do happen, and maybe, just maybe, Callum might love me one day. Argument. Callum's POV. Even though the house had returned to its typical nighttime quiet, I could still feel the tension in the air. Greta had rushed into my office earlier, sharing her version of the argument she had with Aurora, her face flushed with outrage. They had already had disagreements before, and if things continue this way, it won't be the last. I walked to Aurora's room with a sigh. Greta was occasionally a bit too much, but Aurora was a completely different kind of storm. I rapped twice on her door, pushing it open without waiting for a response. The moonlight was dimly shining on her as she stood by the window. She had her arms folded, and it was clear that she was angry too. Her expression was a mixture of annoyance and fatigue as she turned to look at me. Her voice was sharper than needed as, "What do you want, Callum?" she said. My arms were crossed as I leaned idly against the doorframe. "I came to discuss what had happened earlier." She rolled her eyes and looked out the window again. "You are funny. Let me guess. After I and Greta had issues, she came running to you sobbing." I grinned and said, "She didn't cry. She did appear quite distressed, though. This time, what did you say to her?" Aurora whirled, rage blazing in her eyes. What did I say to her? Callum, she called me so many names and said nasty things to me. Should I just let her insult me like that? I ran a hand through my hair and sighed. Greta can be funny at times, but don't let that bother you. Funny? She insulted. Aurora retorted. And you consistently support her. I don't always take her side. You shouldn't waste your time on her, in my opinion, I said. She's such a ride and conceited. Aurora raised her voice. And you're saying that you don't take her sides? You just stand there and let her undermine me every chance she gets. Look, I said, stepping away from the doorframe and into the room. I didn't come here to argue. There are 2 things I came to tell you. First, the doctor will visit tomorrow to see how you and the baby are doing. The mention of the baby made her expression to soften a little, but it didn't completely lower. And? There's a banquet in 3 days, I added. You must attend. A banquet? She scowled. Yes, a banquet, I replied. It's just something formal, and will you at least try to look presentable? Aurora glared at me with her hands balled into fists at her sides. Why didn't you inform me of this sooner? Because I'm telling you now. I shrugged. Isn't that enough information? No, it isn't, she yelled. You cannot simply throw things like this at me and expect me to accept it. I smirked and remarked, I didn't think you'd need 3 days to prepare, but good luck if you do. Evidently finished with the conversation, she rolled her eyes and turned away. She was obviously furious, but to be honest, I wasn't in the mood to argue. But I wasn't done yet. I paused at the door and said, Oh, and one more thing. What now? She asked, not bothering to look at me. Try not to make Greta cry again, I said, allowing a trace of laughter into my tone. You know how sensitive she is. With her eyes burning with rage, Aurora whirled around. Callum, get out. With a laugh, I left the room, shutting the door behind me. Next time, remember to add Alpha to my name. I chuckled. I didn't immediately return to my office. I chose to stay in the hallway and lean against the wall while mentally reliving the exchange between I and Aurora. Aurora had the ability to irritate me, but she also had a way of making me doubt who I was. Most likely, was I too harsh on her? But she didn't make things simple for me, though. She was fiery, obstinate, and prone to making snap judgments. I wanted to leave, but there was something about her that made me want to stay. I exhaled and went downstairs, shaking my head, trying to shake off some disturbing thoughts. It was late in the night, and it seems everyone had gone to bed. I ended up in the sitting room, pouring myself a glass of whiskey and settling into one of the fireside armchairs. Shadows flickered on the walls as the flames crackled softly. Taking a sip of the whiskey, I gazed into the fire and felt its warmth radiate through me, and I shut my eyes momentarily. I believed that a marriage should be a partnership. It frequently felt more like a battlefield with Aurora, though. I appreciated her strong will and fierce independence, and I wonder if making her my mate was the right thing to do. I couldn't dispute the fact that she managed to keep things interesting, though. Even though we had constant arguments, life with Aurora was never dull, and I couldn't imagine my life without her. Even if I don't really love her as much as I loved Greta, I had to admit that being with her was quite interesting. I snapped out of my thoughts when I heard footsteps and saw Greta standing in the doorway. She took a moment to stare at me before entering the room. Her voice was filled with worry as she asked, "Is everything okay, Callum?" "Yes, Greta," I said, dismissing her. "I simply needed some time to think." She gave a small nod and approached. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble between you and Aurora," she stated in a hesitant tone. I put my glass down on the table and sighed. "I understand, Greta, but you must realize that she is adjusting. She finds it difficult." Greta whispered, "That's none of my business, and I mean any disrespect, of course." I arched an eyebrow at her, and she shifted uneasily, looking away. "Just give her some space," I said. Tears of a Luna, Aurora's POV. The faint moonlight that came through the curtains didn't help ease the pain in my chest. I was lying in bed, looking up at the ceiling, with my eyes burning and swollen from crying. Callum's words from earlier replayed in my mind like a haunting melody I couldn't escape. "Try not to make Greta cry. You know how sensitive she is." I scoffed, but the sound barely came out of my mouth. Sensitive? It was like being betrayed. The always flawless Greta who somehow succeeded in gaining Callum's love and respect, even at my expense. My body shook with frustration as I gripped the pillow tightly. No matter how hard I tried, it seemed like I was always falling short in his eyes. Was I the issue? He was more concerned about Greta than he was about me, and that was evident from every argument and sidelong glance. And it broke me. I buried my face in the pillow as the hot, unrelenting tears came again and poured down my cheeks. I wanted to stop crying. I didn't want to feel this powerless, but I couldn't help but feel it. I was his mate, the one person who was meant to love me unconditionally in the whole world. Instead, I felt like an afterthought and a burden. I used the back of my hand to wipe my face, but it didn't stop the tears. Why can't he just love me even if the contract says otherwise? There was a slight creak in the door, and for a moment I foolishly believed it might be Callum. Perhaps he was here to hold me, to apologize, or to tell me that I was mistaken about everything. But no footsteps were heard after the sound subsided. What was I expecting? He might be with Greta. I rolled onto my side and gazed at the empty room next to me. For days, Callum and I had not shared this bed. He always came up with an excuse: early meetings, late work, or an urgent matter that needed his attention. He still found time for Greta, though. The thought made my chest tighten. I couldn't help but feel jealous even though I hated it. It was like a dagger to my heart every time I saw them together. I absolutely desired the way he listened to her and smiled at her, and so it broke my heart to watch him give it to someone else. "I hate you," I muttered into the night, but the words sounded hollow. I didn't really hate him. I was just angry. I really did love Callum with all of my heart. It was the reason this was so intolerable. I wouldn't feel as much pain if I didn't care, even though it seemed like he didn't care at all, and cared more than I wanted to admit. Closing my eyes, and I hoped that sleep would temporarily remove the pain from my body. But the memories prevented me from sleeping. I remembered when I had first saw Callum. The first day he spoke to me, the way he cared. It seemed as though everything changed when his sharp eyes locked with mine. In a low, possessive voice, he had declared then, "You're mine." And I had believed him even though I didn't want to be his. We had an unbreakable electric bond. I believed we were unbreakable for a while. However, things had changed at some point. I let out a sob, which brought me back to the here. He had so much power over me, and I detested how easily he could diminish my value with a few words or none at all. I reached for the blanket, pulling the it tight around me as if it could protect me from the pain. To be honest, I felt really isolated, confined in this house with people who appeared to only care about my failure and pain. I felt like an outsider, even with Greta's fake smiles and patronizing tone. One of her venomous words had left me pained. I pretended not to be bothered by it at that time and laughed it off. But now as I lay here in the dark, I kept thinking about what she had said. What if she was correct? I felt like a fool and desperately wanted to go home. I started crying less as the night went on, and then I felt a dull ache in my chest. I knew I couldn't continue in this way. Callum or anyone else couldn't continue to make me feel this way. I wiped my face, took a deep shuddering breath, and slowly sat up. Except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock, the room was silent. Even though I had no idea what the future held, I silently promised myself that I would not allow this to break me. Callum may not see my value, but that doesn't mean I didn't have any. I'll be all right. I'll be all right with or without him, I said to myself in a tremulous voice. But as I lay down again and looked up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but question whether I was telling the truth. I secretly hoped Callum would reject me. I was hoping he has entered the room. I wanted him to embrace me and let me know that I was the only person he cared about. That wasn't going to happen, though, as the hours went by and the night grew darker. It was not me that Callum had loved. My eyes pricked with tears again, but this time I resisted. Now I wouldn't cry. No, not tonight. I closed my eyes and turned onto my side, holding on to the blanket tightly. Sleep was difficult to come by, but fatigue ultimately took me away. and as I fell asleep, one thought kept coming to me. My self-love would develop if Callum didn't love me. I felt a glimmer of strength for the first time in a long time. I had enough to get me through the night, even though it wasn't much.